And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Doug Mattocks.
A tune called the Trolley Song. Not something you would expect to hear on this instrument. I know I didn't. When I first started learning how to play this 4-string jazz style of banjo, it was for fun. But somewhere in my third year of college, I had this epiphany. I said, I'm quitting college today, driving down to New Orleans, and becoming a professional banjo player. When I got to New Orleans, I was finally doing something in life I wanted to do. And when I got to New Orleans, I came across this fellow named Les Muscat. He uprooted his entire family from London, brought him over to New Orleans where he could study jazz banjo and jazz guitar. So it was a perfect fit. And for part of the lesson, it was the normal stuff, reading music, learning your scales, learning your chords, learning your tunes. But the other half of the lesson was more unorthodox, because he'd sit me down in front of this old record player called a Victrola. Didn't even plug into the wall. You had to take a crank and wind it up like a watch to get the turntable to go. And on top of that turntable, he put these thick records called 78s. And off those old 78s jumped the music I wanted to learn, being played by the very people who were responsible for its creation. So here's a case in point, one of my favorite George M. Smith tunes. He calls it Bang Bang. New Orleans was the start of my career, but not the start of my love of playing these string instruments. For that, I have to take you back at a time when there was absolutely no electronic entertainment to be had by a kid. We had a couple of TV sets in town, but they were all black and white, no color pictures. And to turn one on, you had to get up off the sofa, walk over to the TV and turn a knob. You wanted to change the channel or the volume, you had to get up off the sofa, walk over to the TV, turn a knob. You wanted to turn the TV set off, you had to get up off the sofa, walk over to the TV. Back then, 1 hour of TV gave a kid a whole day's worth of exercise. So for entertainment for us, it was something called square dance parties. And that's where I saw my first guitar player, my first bass player, mandolin, dobro, fiddle player, and Ed Latham. Now, Ed Latham was the best 5-string banjo player in all of eastern North Carolina. Now, I knew that because while he's playing all this fast bluegrass stuff, at the same time, he would be calling the square dance. Now, that you had to see to believe. But it wasn't the only style of banjo he could play. Now, he lived in our little neighborhood, and every once in a while, he'd come out on his front porch after work, around dusk in the evening, just him and his banjo, no musicians to play with, no dancers to play for. And at that time, he'd play the banjo completely different. Now he still used the 3 finger picks, but instead of playing the bluegrass style, he'd break out of that style and start playing a style that he said he created for himself. And whenever Ed would take this style of his and mix it up with Stephen Foster tunes and the like, well, for me, it became the purest sound of the instrument. So to give you an example of that, here's Stephen Foster's Nellie Bly, played in the Ed Latham style. So while Ed was playing those old Stephen Foster tunes, it never seemed like to me more than 15 minutes would go by before half the neighborhood was trying to squeeze up onto that front porch. And when that would happen, Ed would go immediately into his entertainment mode. That's where he started playing faster and fancier, singing tunes and telling stories. Sometimes he'd tell us kids ghost stories. Sometimes I'd get so scared I'd climb up in his lap. which used to upset him because I was pretty heavy for a 22-year-old boy. It was on that front porch that Ed started me on my first lessons on this instrument. And he didn't just teach me tunes, to his credit. He also taught me a little bit about his philosophy on music. And one of the things he kept trying to get across to me was that if I was going to learn to play the banjo, I shouldn't just listen to banjo players and banjo music. He said if I was ever going to get any good at the instrument, I was going to have to start listening to all kinds of music, and more importantly, all kinds of musicians. Case in point, my interpretation of Love Theme from the movie Godfather. When I was 12 years old, I got to go to my first Performing Arts Center show. And for 2.5 hours, flamenco guitarist Carlos Montoya played the most amazing guitar music I'd ever heard in my life. This is my interpretation of that great tune that I heard Carlos Montoya play so many years ago. This is my interpretation of Malagueña.